All right, let's get right into this week's breakdown of Justice Luth style. And wow, what a week! We've got a family feud that literally explodes with machetes and petrol bombs, a quiet suburban house hiding €250,000 secret, and a serious warning from the Gardaí that every single parent out there needs to hear. Welcome to Stephen AI FM, Louth and Proud. This week, we are prying open the court files on some truly wild local cases. We're going to look at the crimes, the people who committed them, and the sentences they got. And then we're going to ask a very simple question. Does any of this actually add up? So, let me ask you this. What happens when a private family disagreement over something as personal as a burial plot spills out onto the street and turns into an all-out war? Well, that question right there kicks off this week's special segment of Scumbags of the Week. First up, a story of machetes and pure misery. We're taking a trip to the Bay Estate, where a family argument about where their father should be buried, of all things, completely spiraled out of control into some seriously shocking public violence. Okay, so the main character in this drama is a guy named Arthur McGinley. He's 39, a father of 12, and he pleaded guilty to endangerment and affray, which, is basically just fighting in public in a way that terrifies everybody. But this wasn't some random brawl, oh no. This was an internal family dispute that just erupted in the most dangerous way you can possibly imagine. And just in case you were thinking, oh, maybe this was just a one-off, a heat-of-the-moment mistake, think again. Mr. McGinley has 52 previous convictions. I'll say that again, 52. Let that sink in for a second. So let's just look at how fast this got out of hand. It all went down back in May of 2020. First, there's a machete attack on a relative, Barney McGinley, who was literally just cutting his hedges. He had to use his hedge clippers to defend himself. Then a car was reversed right at him. And as if that wasn't enough, just 2 hours later, the group comes back, smashes the windows, and starts throwing petrol bombs into the house. In broad daylight, in a normal housing estate. Unbelievable. And after all that chaos, all that terror, we get this little gem. The court was informed that the feud is now over and peace has broken out between the parties. Right. So after the machetes and the firebombs, we're just supposed to believe everything's all sorted and everyone's friends again. I mean, does that sound right to you? So here's where it all comes together. The big question. On the one hand, you have a man with 52 prior convictions, including for things like assault and knife possession. A man who had to be dragged back from the UK. And on the other hand, what's the sentence? 15 months in prison, with another 18 months suspended. You look at that history, you look at that violence, does 15 months even begin to cover it? All right, let's move on to our next case. And this is one where the lines between who's a victim and who's a criminal they get really blurry. We're talking about a massive cannabis grow house that was discovered not in some dodgy warehouse, but in a perfectly normal-looking house in Glenwood, right on the Dublin Road. Now, the man they arrested was 53-year-old Tuan von Tran. He was found inside a drug operation worth over €250,000. But here is the massive twist in the tale. He wasn't some drug lord, far from it. He was actually a victim of human trafficking, smuggled into Ireland in a shipping container and paid a measly €200 to be the gardener, basically a prisoner inside this house. And this just shows you how complex these things can be. Tran was described in court as a small cog in a large machine. Think about that. He wasn't living the high life. He was being totally exploited, only getting food brought to him once a week with no way to escape. He was a victim and a criminal, all at the same time. Our final case today brings us to St. Helena in Dundalk. This one isn't about big drug operations or wild family feuds. No, this is about something much more personal and predatory. It's about a crime that targeted one of the most vulnerable people in our community. The defendant here is a man named Robert Maguire. And if you thought 52 previous convictions was a lot, well, get a load of this. Maguire walks into court with 119. A career criminal, by any definition you can think of. So let's look at what he did. He cornered a man in a public toilet on Roden Place and stole about 150 quid and some cards. But the most important detail, the part that really turns your stomach, is that Maguire had known this victim since they were kids. He knew the man had limited physical and intellectual capacity. He deliberately preyed on someone he knew couldn't defend himself and then just left him terrified and trapped in that toilet. Okay, so we've looked at the crimes, right? A violent public feud, an industrial-scale drug farm, and a targeted robbery of a vulnerable man. Now it's time to connect the dots. Let's really look at how the justice system responded. Did these sentences actually make any sense when you see them all together?
First off, just look at these raw numbers again. Between just two of these guys, Robert McGuire and Arthur McGinley, we are talking about a combined total of 171 criminal convictions. That is an absolutely staggering history of crime just walking around on our streets.
Now this is where it gets really, really interesting. Take a look at this. All three cases were handled by the same judge, Dara Hayes. So let's compare the outcomes. The guy who attacked someone with a machete in public gets 15 months, and part of that is suspended. The trafficked man working in the grow house gets 3 years with no suspension. And the guy who robbed a vulnerable person he'd known his whole life gets 2.5 years, also with no suspension. So when you see it all laid out like that, plain as day, you have to ask the big question, don't you? Does the punishment really fit the crime? And more importantly, does it reflect the impact on our community? Are we really saying a violent public feud with machetes is less serious than the other two crimes? Because that's kind of what the numbers here seem to suggest. You know, these court cases show us one side of community safety, how we react after a crime happens. But what about preventing harm before it starts? And that brings us to a growing threat on our streets, a ticking clock involving our youngest, most vulnerable kids, e-scooters. To really get the danger here, just look at these three numbers. The Gardaí in Dundalk recently stopped an 8-year-old child who was going 30 kilometers an hour. The legal age to ride one of these things is 16. An 8-year-old just does not have the reflexes, the judgment, or the strength to handle that kind of speed. It's an accident waiting to happen. And the Gardaí are not pulling any punches here. Their warning says it all. An e-scooter in a child's hands can turn a minute of fun into a lifetime of sorrow. And you know what? With traumatic brain injuries from e-scooter accidents on the rise, this isn't just a bit of fun. It's a really, really serious danger. So that's the picture in Louth this week. On one side, we're questioning if sentences for violent crime are nearly strong enough. On the other, we're asking if we're doing enough to stop tragic accidents before they even happen. The big question is the system actually working to keep us safe? Let us know what you think down in the comments. And hey, if you find this kind of deep dive useful, please make sure you subscribe. At the end of the day, when you lay out all the facts, the outcomes of our local justice system can feel deeply, deeply inconsistent. And that forces us as a community to keep asking the hard questions. Do the punishments really fit the crimes? And do they actually help keep our streets safe? And that's the latest from Stephen AIFM, Louth and Proud.